Thanks to all the subscribers. Please like, subscribe, and comment. With that out of the way, let's get into it. They call him Larry King Hoover, the leader of the Gangster Disciple Nation, which at the time was one of the largest and most powerful gangs in the country, with a membership in excess of 30,000 members across 35 states. Larry Hoover has been in prison for over 40 years and is now serving 6 life sentences on Hell on Earth, the ADX Supermax Penitentiary in Florence, Colorado, where he is locked in a small concrete cell 23 hours a day, with no communication with any other inmates or guards. By Mr. Hoover's 16th birthday, he had been shot 6 times in numerous gangbanging battles, while ascending in the ranks of leadership of his own street organization. In 1967, a larger gang, the King Cobras, tried to take Larry Hoover's gang territory, but he stood his ground. He got hundreds of Cobras to join him. The two gangs merged and became known as the Black Gangster Nation. 2 years later, another merger occurred. Larry Hoover had a movement throughout the south and west sides of Chicago, which numbered more than 5,000 at the time. Hoover then connected with David Barksdale's 10,000-strong disciples, and the Black Gangster Disciple Nation was born. Hoover ended up being sentenced for ordering the murder of William Pookie Young. According to the government, Pookie robbed one of Larry's drug spots, and shortly after, Pookie was found shot in the head 6 times. Hoover received a 200-year state sentence for the murder of the rival. While serving his time for that sentence, the feds seized the moment and swooped in. Hoover was charged in a federal indictment in 1995 on charges he continued to oversee the murderous drug gang's reign of terror from prison. Allegedly, Larry Hoover lived better in prison than most people live in the real world. Some say while in Vienna State Prison, Larry had keys to every door but the front door, and women came to visit the facility at all hours. Allegedly, there was a wall between 2 cells that was removed to accommodate Mr. Hoover. In 1992, the U.S. Attorney's Office, led by Assistant Attorney Ron Safer, set its sights on Chicago gangs, more specifically, the Gangster Disciples. However, after nearly 20 years in state prison, Hoover had a movement on the streets and was popular amongst various officials and politicians. It seemed possible at that point that Hoover might actually have had a chance at freedom. Assistant Attorney Ron Safer came up with a last-chance idea. He knew Hoover received many visitors, so the government placed miniature transmitters into paper-thin visitors' passes, worn by individuals that came to visit Mr. Hoover in Vienna Minimum Security State Prison. They called it Operation Headache. The visitors did not volunteer for this operation, nor were they aware of their participation. According to the government, Hoover was on tape bragging about the freedom he enjoyed at the Minimum Security State Prison. Hoover said on tape that one of his top lieutenants could corrupt anybody at Statesville Correctional Center, and he also claimed that the gang paid bribes to have keys made for every door in the penitentiary except the doors to leave. For $100 at a time, one prison staffer let the gang use a key-making machine, and we would be making keys in 2 minutes. This conversation allegedly occurred on December 11, 1993, as he met privately with alleged GD member John Baugh in the visitors area of Vienna Correctional Center. The miniature transmitters were placed in Baugh's visitor's pass. The government claims that Hoover's federal drug kingpin indictment wasn't served until Hoover was allegedly discussing Nation's Day on tape with his visitors. The government's allegations against Larry Hoover are that he conspired to implement a street tax called Nation's Day, in which gang members were to hand over one day's drug profits once a week, bringing in an estimated $200,000 to $300,000 a week. This conspiracy is what the government based its 1995 indictments on. The following excerpt from the government tapes recorded in November 1993, November 7, 1993, Larry Hoover. I want everybody doing everything unintelligible, reefer, cocaine. Tell them, everybody out there gotta give me a day. Every week you get a different day. Tuesday I want to rake in $200,000 or $300,000. Tuesday. Another tape excerpt reportedly has Hoover allegedly changing his mind about doing Nation's Day. On those same tapes, Mr. Hoover is quoted as saying, "We don't need that. Any businessman would understand that." It's presumed that Larry was referring to not doing Nation's Day at all, although the jury was never allowed to hear this part of the tape. In total, the government had 55 hours of taped conversations between Hoover and his visitors. The prosecution only transcribed 4 hours, and those were the only portions of the tape heard in court and by the public. Mr. Hoover employed political endeavors and outreach programs and gained favor with the Chicago community. During this time, There were countless articles in the Chicago media defending Hoover and saying that he should be paroled. Hoover changed the name of the organization from Gangster Disciples to Growth and Development, and forming the 21st Century Vote Organization, Hoover assumed responsibility for organizational activities, including registering minority voters, instigating thousands of minorities to rally in a march on Chicago's City Hall, and starting education rallies for the poor. He organized various charity events including Save the Children promotions, which sponsored free concerts for kids. He's also responsible for getting his spokesman Wallace Gator Bradley to meet with political leaders like Reverend Jesse Jackson, whose half-brother millionaire businessman Noah Robinson is also incarcerated, serving several life terms for his alleged involvement with another Chicago gang El Rukin, and President Clinton at the White House. Hoover required that if a GD wanted to be involved in the administration of 21st Century Vote business, they were required to stop all illegal activity. It is also alleged that at this time Hoover ordered a ceasefire in the streets. In August of 1995, Larry Hoover, along with Adrian Brad, Gregory Schell, Andrew Howard, Jerry Strawhorn, Darrell Branch, Tyron Z. Williams, and William Edwards were indicted for heading a multi-million-dollar organized crime syndicate that stretched across 35 states and into 40 major cities. Within the 4 weeks after Mr. Hoover was presented with his 1995 indictment for heading a continuing criminal enterprise, police reported an eruption of shootings and 10 slayings of Gangster Disciples members. While awaiting trial, more Gangster Disciple leaders were charged with the murder of 2 GD members that were working with the government, one an informer, the other, a government witness. The defense for Hoover called over 70 witnesses to testify to the existence and legitimacy of growth and development, 21st Century Vote, and various other community programs Hoover started. Federal Judge Duff told Assistant U.S. Attorney Safer not to allow the recorded tapes of Larry and his associates to be heard by the public before the trial was concluded. Safer and the U.S. Attorney's Office sealed one tape, but not the 2 copies that were made. As a result, Judge Duff was on his way to court and heard excerpts of the tapes as then President of the United States. Bill Clinton spoke about Larry Hoover and the Gangster Disciples problem on the radio. Larry and the GDs were unable to get a fair trial by jury because everyone had heard some part of the tapes. Attorney Safer was brought back into court and reprimanded, as Judge Duff told him that he knew what they were trying to do and he wasn't going to allow it. Funny enough, a short time later, Federal Judge Duff removed himself from the case. On May 9, 1997, after 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found Hoover guilty. U.S. Attorney Safer appeared before media and proclaimed, "We are the biggest gang in Chicago." Mr. Hoover is currently in the Florence ADX Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, serving 6 life sentences, 7 2-year sentences, and 3 4-year sentences, all sentences running concurrently. For years, Hoover has been housed in solitary confinement at the Supermax prison, which counts a number of high-profile and notorious detainees, including Sinaloa cartel boss Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, September 11th terrorist attack plotter Zacarias Moussaoui, and Jeff Fort, the Chicago gang leader who founded the El Rukns. In a September 2024 interview, a journalist asked Mr. Hoover if he wanted to say anything on his own behalf. Hoover hunched forward into a microphone and said in a thin voice that he is a completely different person than the man devoted to gang life decades ago. "I have had a chance to reflect on my life and the trouble that my existence has caused in the community," he said. "Here in the Supermax, you're locked up at least 21 hours a day. You go away in your cell and reflect on every aspect of your life, and you see things differently. You see things you're proud of, and you see things that maybe you're not so proud of, and you realize that life is too short." If he were released, Hoover said, he would counsel others on how to avoid gangs, not join them. Hoover's motion has been pending for years, first before U.S. District Judge Harry Leinenweber, and then Blakey, who inherited the case after Leinenweber died earlier this year. Blakey said he would entertain any supplemental filings in writing and then rule at a later date. The motion also revealed that an email message was sent August 26, 2024, by a known Gangster Disciples member to 123 fellow gang members in federal prison, referring to Hoover as Dad and using coded terminology, in the form of a basketball analogy, to instruct all incarcerated GDs to stay out of trouble and temporarily suspend gang activity until Hoover gets a ruling in his case. This communication is deeply concerning, Assistant U.S. Attorney Julia Schwartz wrote. It demonstrates the continued power high-ranking GD leaders, and specifically Larry Hoover, hold over the GDs, and underscores the extremely high risk of recidivism and the danger to the community if Hoover is released. It is not in dispute that many people from all walks of life, including politicians, celebrities, community activities, and people who self-identify as GDs, support Hoover, Bonjean wrote in a 2022 court filing. Indeed, the fact that Mr. Hoover is supported by individuals who are not gang members is what frightens the government the most. The government does not want to see a rehabilitated Hoover. It wants to hold on to its narrative of Hoover as the most notorious, dangerous, and violent man on the planet. What do you think? Is Mr. Hoover entitled to his freedom after decades in a cage? Let us know in the comment section. And as always, although there are convictions in this matter, I must stress that an indictment is not evidence of guilt. Charges are only allegations, and each defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Blessings. Luke 17:3-4. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. Give.